Hello, and welcome to a brand new mini series that we've decided to do. Levi and I are going to be chatting from time to time about things as they pop up. Admittedly, we were just joking about the fact that neither of us knows where this conversation is going to go. And so I'm just going to start by leading in with something that popped into my mind just as we started this introduction, which was something that I noticed this morning. I have a good amount of Christian conditioning, admittedly. So, right now, as you know, we've written Proof That You're God, and that's out there. And we're working on a number of other books and projects. And one of those is a historical fiction centered around the 3 years of Jesus's life that we have any documentation of whatsoever. And I know it could be argued, well, it's not really documentation. Whatever, it's a story. And the fact is, when you look at the story, there's really only 3 years where he says anything. He says one thing before the age of 30, and then there's 3 years where he says a bunch of stuff and then he dies. And so I've been working on basically a recounting, I want to say, of those 3 years, but through the eyes of a person who kind of got what we're saying about proof that you're God and may even have experienced some metaphysical weirdness or some miraculous things, as some of us can attest to experiencing ourselves, but got carried away with the idea, leaned into the Messiah thing, leaned into, the story of the culture around him, leaned into his own conditioning, in fact. And while still spreading the word that we're all one, embodying that to the best of his ability, slowly got lost in his own sauce, as it were. And that's what led to everything going sideways and him ultimately dying. And so there's a lot of insight in that as about, I would say, the relationship between ourselves and everybody else, how important it is to not think you need to save them because it puts you in a position that is divisive in itself. And it sets you up like you have a fucking target on you, right? And so because people want to be saved, and then other people are the ones who want to be looked up to, and so they're going to become jealous and envious and all of that stuff. And when you look at the story of Jesus, that's kind of what happened. Anyway, the point being is that this morning it dawned on me that I've been struggling with this story because I almost don't want to invalidate the idea of Jesus being perfect. And isn't that fucked? And it's because of my conditioning, of my growing up with Jesus being like, the Son of God, the closest thing to heaven, blah, 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 blah. And so all of a sudden thinking of him as a human being, not just saying he was a human being, but actually like envisioning him with a life where he had a job and maybe he left home and he had siblings and friends and shit. And he was upsetting people at the same time as trying to do good. Like there's a whole human story there. And it's been odd trying to get that out because of that block that Jesus was so perfect according to the childhood story I grew up with. Figured that'd be a good place to start.
Yeah, no, that's interesting for sure. I mean, I don't have like the same religious kind of upbringing, but I can relate to it. You're coming into this whole sphere of the metaphysical or whatever, right? And you're introduced to all these people who have the answers, and you immediately create an idea of them and start to kind of build up who they are, the image they have, what they can do for you, and something you want to be, right? Or achieve, or all this shit. And it's not an easy thing to break that down, and I'm sure like when it's coming all the way from childhood, it's even more just deep rooted, right?
Well, that's exactly it. But we can do the same with anything. I mean, we're seeing that right now in terms of Donald Trump and the US presidency, right? Like we have this beautiful idea of creating a structure, a system that we can regulate our life with, that can guarantee that we have, equality in trade and equality in how we treat one another, and that, there's commerce and all of that. And that's basically what all government is. But we almost have this idea like, and everybody who's going to run for office, everybody who's going to be a public servant, which is actually what it's called, right, is going to be of high integrity. They're going to go into that system thinking this is for the good of the whole. And so we base the idea of the system on this assumption that only good people are going to get into it and are only ever going to run it. And that's just so naive when it comes to I don't know, humanity and how we actually endeavor to look at the world as we grow up because we are primarily selfish when we
Mm.
grow up. That's what happens when you're afraid and don't understand what's happening around you. You protect yourself. That is just the default. And that is what we go through childhood, into adolescence, and so on. And eventually, what we're supposed to come to terms with, but we don't, right? Like we try to stay in this world where we don't grow. We just find a place where, like, now I know who I am and I just got to do this till I die.
Mm.
Instead of continuously changing as a person, continuously developing new insights and new perspectives by questioning the old ones. It's funny actually. I was mentioning this to you in one of our Patreon groups on a Sunday um, about having somebody on Instagram, because I've been having a lot of these conversations lately, define belief for me, the actual definition. And I was reading it going, why does that look familiar? Like why does that look so familiar? And so I went and looked up the definition of delusion, and they're almost the same, with the exception that a delusion is a belief you won't question.
Yeah, I had a similar thing a little while ago. I was talking with my mother actually, and we were talking. We have a word. I don't know if this will come across in English, but it's like we have a word that is like it's inbilla, and that means to kind of imagine, sort of, but it's not quite the same word. But you kind of imagine yourself being something, or and this is a very negative word that literally is the same as believing it in something, people, if we're talking about that word, it's very negatively loaded. And then we have this tool or belief, which is just great. It's like, it's amazing. Let's go there. And hope as well is kind of in a similar category. Everyone hopes everything all the time. So, yeah.
And you almost don't want to invalidate that because it sounds so negative. And yet, on the other hand, hope in itself can be kind of a negative because, and somebody was making this point, and it was somebody who had gone through, the civil rights movement and all that, and they were making this point in an interview that, hope doesn't change anything. You could waste your whole life hoping. You have to actually do something, but it feels really good to hope. And that's kind of the point is that we get lost in the emotion. And that's a big part of what we're seeing right now too, is this fixation on our current emotional state. Like we're almost obsessed with it. Our politics are driven by it. I feel bad about this one thing, and therefore I have to make sure it never happens again. And we get really polarized, but it's always just like, make me feel better now.
Mm.
Make me feel better now. And it's almost like we've just figured that since we have so much in terms of the illusion of control, why should we have to put up with these petty emotions that we don't like? Why should we have to put up with these things that we don't want to think? Why should we have to go through that? Surely there's a way to control that away. And we're trying to find it.
I started this little business about like being present, like towards, the business market. And I'm kind of writing a little bit on LinkedIn. And the other day I posted like a post that was kind of like, about meditation and how we're just using it to kind of feel better. And it's just interesting to see there was absolutely no response. No one want to kind of associate like a like or anything to it. So I find it interesting. We don't want to look at that. That's all we're trying to do. We're just trying to feel better all the time. And on the note of this business that I've been trying to make, and I've been thinking a little bit about the flow, right? And what is the flow? And what you often hear, and I'm not saying I'm right there, but I've just been having this thought. What you often hear is that in the flow, you're just kind of you're just kind of on a cloud, Ooh, everything is just happening greatly. That's at least kind of the image that I've kind of created about that state, right? But then it just hit me the other day that kind of like, because I've been with this business, I've been delaying it and I've been thinking a lot about why I want to do it, and all these things that are just, and a lot of fear going out there and saying, oh, I know something about this, all this shit. And who's to say that's not the flow? You know what I mean? To go through that shit and just sit in it and, judge myself for not doing anything, but also kind of like going through all the process of like, why am I doing this? Like, where is it coming from? And back and forth. But it's like, you know what I mean? I and I haven't felt great all the time, but I haven't had a problem with it either, you know?
No, I hear exactly what you're saying because that's it, right? Like, what is the flow? We can conceptualize it, and it's exactly as you said. People are all of a sudden like, "Oh yeah, no, everything's easy all the time." It's like, hold on. It's not that suddenly everything's just easy. It's that you stop resisting whatever it is you're going through, right? And so there's less energy that's wasted. That's really all it is. Instead of just bitching about every thought that goes through your head, instead of trying to escape everything that goes through your mind or every emotion you feel, you just don't resist that. And then all of a sudden, you're in the quote unquote flow, but you were never out of the flow. That's the funniest part about it. It just felt like you were being beaten instead of flowing because you were pushing against it. And that was the only reason that it didn't feel like the flow. But there is no being out of the flow. That in itself is an illusion. So that's an awesome point. So I want to talk about this because we're going to go in a different direction because I've been thinking about this a lot and I've been having a lot of conversations about this. We're going weird now. All right, existence. I'm having conversations with Christians on Instagram because I made a post saying that when you look at the whole creator created thing, because people will say that every creation has a creator. So therefore, there must be a God. But hold on. So if every creation has a creator, then who created God? And they'll go, well, obviously God is the uncreated. That is the argument, is that God is the first cause, is the uncreated, is the thing that does not need to be made, and therefore makes everything else. And that sounds lovely. Don't get me wrong, it sounds fantastic, but it also sounds a lot like how we view what we do. Like we just make things, right? It doesn't sound like it's actually based on any degree of logic or reason. It sounds like it's just riddled with humanity, right? And so I'm trying to make the argument that there is no first cause because there is no non-existence. And this is very difficult for people to understand because they're like, well, what caused that? It's like nothing. That's the point, is that it's always there. It's always existence. There's no opposite to existence. Right. And they'll go, well, the Big Bang was the beginning of the universe. It's like the universe isn't existence. Right. Because even the people who say the Big Bang is what happened admit it came from somewhere. And they don't say it came from nothing. What they say is it came from a higher source of energy and density and heat and everything and light than the universe itself is able to express. So there was more energy there, more potential there than there is in the universe itself. And so I find that fascinating because that means that something is there. And it's not was there, is there, because there is a state of no time or space, right? Because the universe is the expression of time and space. And so before the expression of time and space, you had no time and no space, but that potential is still there. So what do you have without space or time? You have infinite potential of every experience that could ever happen, of everything that could ever possibly exist, but it doesn't take form. It can't take form because you need time and space to have form. You can't have form without time or space. Right. And so that's why we keep tripping on this. We're like, well, what existed? Everything, but not everything as expressed through time and space. That's just how we are able to experience the potential that is, quote unquote, before the Big Bang. Right. But the argument is always from Christians like, oh, well, if you don't believe in God, then you believe everything came from nothing. And I keep coming back. It's like, no, I'm saying everything came from everything, that everything that could possibly exist ever always does in that state that is outside of space and time, but expressed as space and time. And so I'm having fun with that thought process. I was getting into a whole thing with ChatGPT of just going back and forth with this. And it's fun because it's kind of like the question I was asking on TikTok. And it's funny because you mentioned like questioning meditation and having no response whatsoever, right? But I like asking questions like this because I think it's really important. If you only existed in potential, would you know that? Would it change your experience of reality if you only existed in potential? Because the potential would be real to you. It's kind of like the simulation question, right? If you existed in a simulation, would you know? How could you know if all you have ever experienced is the simulation?
Hmm.
And that's why people are like, are we in a simulation? What if it's not that at all? What if all of this is just what could be? But to us, as the thing that could be, it is.
Yeah, but it's even like the whole simulation thing. I feel it's kind of the same thing as talking about creation and like where is it coming from? You will just always kind of move backwards until you say no one ever knows, because it's like no one will ever know, right? Well, it's not exactly like whether it's this or that or
No, but the
yeah.
assumption is almost always someone else is doing it. That's the thing that
Mm,
always gets me is that
yeah.
we always come back to like if it's a simulation, someone created it, right?
Yeah.
And we never come back to the simple reality that there is only ever the experience of ourselves,
Mm,
regardless if we're the ones who created the simulation or the ones in the simulation. We are only the experience of ourselves. It always comes back to this one thing. I'm
mm,
here now.
yeah.
That's it. And we are uncomfortable with that. And so we consistently come up with this idea of another being, which is where the whole creator thing comes from. Because if you think about what I'm saying is that the universe is an expression of potential that is always there for eternity. And immediately a Christian will go, right, that's God. And it's not that they're incorrect, it's that their idea is that that thing that is beyond space and time gives a shit. Like that it actually has some intelligent quote unquote plan that it's going somewhere when it has no reason to do that. It has no reason whatsoever to have a preference. It has no reason whatsoever to have a fear. It's eternal. It can't not be, and there's nothing else compared to it. So all of these ideas, like it wants a certain thing, it loves us, it does all that, is totally fictional, but always based on this idea of it instead of us because we're it. That's the funniest part is that if it's all potential, you're it. You are straight up all of the potential of the universe in the experience of you right now. And the same is true for everybody listening. And that is the funniest part about it is that we're the ones that are the God. We're the ones that are existence. We're the ones that are that potential. But we're so lost in this idea of division that that idea in itself translates to whatever we look at that is outside of space and time. We're like, oh no, it's got to be a thing. It's like, no, it's us. It's
Mm,
just not us the way we're experiencing it right now. In the same way that a light photon is at its point of origin and its destination at the exact same moment. We are in every moment of our lives at the exact same moment, but experiencing all of those moments separately, which is
mm.
fucking cool.
It is cool. But yeah, it is like an uncomfortable thing to even think about it. I think yeah, it's a lot about the responsibility, right? It's like, okay, it's this yeah, I remember like going through like, the state of the world, right? Kind of starting to take on responsibility for that, and it's like, yeah, kind of, but it's like yeah, but it's also like, as we've been talking about often, it's what what I best can do is just kind of remove those parts of me that has been contributing to all that shit, right? So it's kind of like it takes a bit of the pressure off
That's
because it's
it.
like that's doable, but still it's like there's no one else, that can do it for me. And whenever it's like I'm noticing more and more like all the things that kind of drain me, right? And irritates me and stuff like that. It's all me. It's just me having an opinion and having some idea how it should be. And it's like there's yeah, it's always me, right? And it's just I don't know. It's responsibility is but it's freedom too, right? It's just that's the thing. I don't have to. do it, right? That's and it's like honestly, like when it's the simplest thing, right? You can just but you can't be like there are attachments, right? So it's like there's shit to look at
For
basically.
sure. But why
Uh
are you doing it? It's not because you should, but because you're tired of the consequence of that attachment,
yeah.
right? Like that's it. You're just like, I'm fucking tired. I was like, I've tried this shit. It's not working. And so eventually you just stop. But it's exactly as you said, it's not difficult. You're just surrendering. Like that's all you're doing. You're just going, okay, maybe I don't fucking know everything. Maybe my opinion's not like the most important thing, or the thing I'm afraid of is not the most important thing to dig into. And that's all it is. And in that, you're just bringing down walls that separated you from everybody else. I made this post on Instagram the other day, and I think it was yesterday, about how, we spend all of our time looking for a higher power. But what if the higher power is us working together? Like, what if it's us looking to each other instead of up to some concept in the sky to which somebody responded without missing a beat? Imagine if everybody just believed in Jesus Christ. And so I responded, I'm like, well, then we'd be just as divisive as you are. Because what are they saying there? Like, yeah, we'd all get along if everybody just agreed with me. They're not willing
Yeah,
to sacrifice anything, and it's all based on their own fear and need. So to them, the priority isn't getting along. The priority isn't life. The priority isn't changing anything. It's them. It's them, and everything would just be better if everybody just do what I want them to. And that is the point, is that there's no surrender in that. And if we did surrender our shit, then we'd actually start to relate. Then we'd actually start to be in this together, because that's what we have in common, right? Uncertainty. But we're all divided by our false certainties. And until we're willing to surrender them, we can't see each other.
for sure. No, I randomly came across, the Transcendence movie yesterday, and I started watching it. I'm like, didn't they have like a movie review of that one? So I saw that as well afterwards. And that was fucking interesting. Recommend that to anyone. Watch the movie first. Because that's this, right? Because it's like the potential is potentially so fucking mind-blowing that it's scary, right? It's like what it's a whole other world potentially, and it's but it's possible if we start to look or like work together, right? I had this discussion with someone about like war and like how much kind of all the technology that has come from these wars and all this shit. And I'm like, but we don't know the alternative, right? What would we have like made without all that shit? It's like we don't know. We're not there at all, right?
Right. Well, it all comes down to those little changes, right? And we don't recognize that. It's funny because I do karaoke, not just for fun now, but also as a business. For anybody who's following us on Dualistic Unity, we have a karaoke business here on Vancouver Island. And the point being that there is something to karaoke where it's not about singing well, it's not about how you perform, it's about just the willingness to say yes to uncertainty, to being seen, to change. Ultimately, it's the smallest little yes as opposed to the no that you're used to giving. And that yes translates into other yeses. All of a sudden, you're saying yes to other kinds of change. You're saying yes to other uncertainties, but it starts with the littlest ones. And we keep wanting massive change. We keep wanting to see our life change overnight instead of recognizing that that conversation with the cashier at the grocery store that you didn't have most of the time might change everything you do for the rest of the day. And that's just on your side. Imagine what it's doing for them. Right. And that's the point. It's just the little changes, but it's a habit like anything else. It's a trajectory like anything else, right? The more we say yes to change, the more we're willing to question ourselves, the more we're willing to go towards uncertainty, the more we experience things that we never thought possible because we were so busy telling ourselves what was possible, right? And that's exactly what we get stuck in. But the more we do it individually, the more it catches on, or rather has the potential to catch on. Because I think that's the point. We forget that It's not about forcing people. You can't force people. You can't inspire people through force. And the only thing you can inspire in people through force is usually an emotional reaction because they're not thinking about it. And that's the last thing we want. That's politics. The way it is right now, we want people to have an actual level head, right? We want to have a level head ourselves. And what does that mean? It means sitting through it, like we were saying earlier, right? It means not needing to feel pleasant and positive all the time because perhaps in facing those other feelings, we will learn something from them that we haven't been learning. Right? Maybe that's change right there. It's just allowing ourselves to feel things that we normally run from.
Yeah, it's funny with those small things, that like you mentioned, like just the first thing that popped into my head was like today I was at a coffee shop and kind of got a coffee before I was meeting someone. And this coffee shop guy was just so nice, you know. It was like, he kind of got my eye contact and was like genuinely like, making sure I got the right order and kind of like took his time, like pouring. It's the little things and it impacts me immediately, you know. And I'm a little bit more chippery after that, you know. And it's like kind of there's something about because I sometimes think about it when I go to the store and kind of like and I it's not like I'm like rude or anything, but it's not always I'm kind of on, but I'm noticing the times that I feel in that mood and I want to kind of be a little bit chatty. There's like a couple of things happening. It's like you don't always get a response, right? You it's like, because they're in their thing, which I was yesterday, you know what I mean? It's like and then but there's this kind of fear of going outside the norm because everyone is very comfortable with the like hello, thank you, and then you're gone. And it's like but it's like going out of that and just risking it. But then again, what the fuck risk? What is the person going to say? Like, I had this guy today and he tried to be nice. What the fucking, it is like, it's like, what risk? But I can feel it's in me, this fear of doing, doing something nice. But I'm like, also like, I, it's, it's for me, kind of, because if I let go of that wall that is there, it's just going to be a lot easier to just keep going.
For you. See, that's the thing, right? Somebody recognized recently that because I've said it for 6 seasons. We're on seven now on the podcast, but I've said it consistently. I'm not a pleasant person. Like I'm an open person, I'm an enthusiastic person. I got nothing against anybody, right? But I don't claim to be above any fucking thing. I got my petty gripes, like people piss me off. Shit happens, like that's more or less it. But it's easy to miss because I'm enjoying myself because I'm fully immersed in the experience that I'm having. And so when I do the grocery store thing and I'm chatting, I'm not chatting for them, you know? I'm not chatting for them, which is why I'm chatting, frankly, right? Because it's not about them, right? And that's exactly what the difference is that we go out and we chat for a reason, right? We chat for an impact. We chat for some kind of a return. And of course, there's fear there. Of course, there's anxiety there, right? Because there's immediately like, oh, I'm performing. I'm performing so I can get something back. And it's like, why? What do you need? What do you need? Right? And that's where it gets easier.
Yeah, it's a really good point because that's what's happening. You are creating a little story ahead of it happening that should play out if this is going to be a success. You know what I mean? And it's like it's then it becomes about something, And but then again, like I honestly have to say, I can't help my brain from doing that shit. You know what I mean? It's just doing it, and sometimes it's easier to just look at it and smile. But sometimes I get caught up in it, right? And it's like you don't always know either. Maybe you notice a bit later in the day, but
Well, that's it,
yeah.
right? And it's all you're really ever doing. It's like anything else in life. Like you could do something 100 times and then all of a sudden go, oh God, I'm doing this the hard way. right?
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with doing that. That's how you come to a genuine insight. Literally, this is how schools bank on us learning math. They will just feed us sheet after sheet after sheet of repetitive questions, hoping that the repetition will inspire an insight into how that equation works, right? Because they know the more you repeat something, the more attention you're supposed to be paying to it, in which case you will eventually learn something out of that. And we do that all the time. And this is what I was saying. Like, I'm okay with having my petty shit. I'm okay with, sometimes feeling a little sorry for myself. I'm okay with doing all that. But that's what makes it easier to work with it, is that I'm not judging myself for it. I'm not assuming I shouldn't be doing it, right? What I do is be accountable for it, and then pay attention as it's happening. And what I notice is that the attention in itself is what starts to kill that habit because that habit was based on old logic, was based on a lack of awareness last time around, right? And so it's just paying attention. That's really all it is. But as soon as you're like, I'm supposed to be beyond this. I'm not supposed to be dealing with this stuff anymore. Oh my God, I thought I dealt with that. I thought I was finished with the shadow work and all that stuff. And you're just like, just relax. Like there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong except your insistence that there's something wrong. And that's what's making it suck, as opposed to something educational and something with potential. Because it's the fear of it that we're used to, right? It's the reaction to that shit that we're used to. We're not used to the feeling. If we were, we wouldn't have a problem, right? It's just that we keep running from it instead of feeling it. Like Sundays, we do this hour-long stretch on Patreon, which because you often show up there. And the stretch is unguided. Nobody's saying anything. All the room, like all the cameras are muted. If you're on camera, sometimes people don't turn their cameras on, but everything's muted. There's a playlist that we provide people if you want to listen. But the point is that in that stretch, because nobody's telling you anything and you're not following anything, you're just kind of left to yourself. And not only are you stretching your body, but you're stretching yourself, your emotions. You're not running from any of your shit. You're working out the kinks, as it were. And just like in stretching, it hurts first, especially if you haven't looked at it for a while. But and then we're like, oh, something's wrong. It's hurting. But you don't do that when you're stretching.
You stretch more, right? Like
Exactly.
this place needs to be stretched more. You feel it and relax into it, right? That's like I feel is no, I really enjoy those sessions, and it's like it's so much freer, I gotta say, like compared to other like classes like that where you kind of follow something, right? Because it's like there's a lot of attention going to the following. So it's like how much is left to actually feeling it, and as you say, also open up to the whole emotional aspect of it. So I think this is a really good stuff. Yeah.
Absolutely. Man, I'm stoked for this series. I think we're going to wrap up here in the next few minutes, but we've covered a lot of shit so far. I'm excited, man, because I mean, we've chatted at a number of events because you've come to several of our retreats. I saw you in November, actually, at the Port Alberni retreat, which was great. But we've never had one of these conversations recorded. And so I'm really excited to share this with our listeners. Listeners, thank you so much for joining us. Of course, you can find Levi on some of our Patreon calls. You can also connect with Levi for a one-on-one coaching session if you'd like to check out through the website at dualisticunity.com. I know he would love to shoot the shit with anybody who is just feeling, going through stuff, being human. But this has been a lot of fun. We still don't know what we're going to name this series. Amanda had recommended Going Nowhere with Levi and Ray, which I think sounds actually really good.
That's a cool name. I like it.
In that case, that's what we'll do. Going nowhere. This has been episode one. Levi, thanks so much for making time, man. And listener, thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully, we will see you on Patreon in the near future.
Bye bye.